the Director of District European Studies. This talk is really catalyzed by really Craig doing the Cookville program, so he suggested I could introduce the speaker, but it's a joint effort, and we have other speakers, other sponsors as well. The CAHI College of Arts and Humanities Institute, Charles Koch Foundation, Department of Political Science, the Ostrom Workshop, and also I mentioned the Institute of European Studies. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to welcome Isabela Mares to Bloomington here today. Just by way of background, Isabela is somebody whose work I've interacted with for quite a bit. Her first book, The Politics of Social Risk, came out when I was in grad school, finishing grad school, and reading about the role of business associations and employers and cross-class alliances and trying to develop welfare states. And she really took it to the next level, creating a much more sophisticated foundational view of this very complex process about the development of social policy. So it's quite path-breaking in that sense. And then when I started teaching her, I was very interested in comparative political economy. I was reading about wage bargaining and union density. And then she writes another book about a very different subject on taxation, wage bargaining, and unemployment, where she really really tears it, not just, you don't tear it apart, but you kind of critique some of the more simplistic Comfort-Driffield models in economics, right, in labor economics, to show how there's really a lot more going on with the relationship between union density and unemployment, and then has some really nice work on that as well. And now she's got a third project, which she's going to speak from today. It's called From Open Secrets to Secret Ballots, the Adoption of Electoral Reforms Protecting Voters Against Intimidation, which she again uses very, sort of very careful historical, micro-foundational analysis. In this case, I guess the most empirics are on the German case, but you also have a follow-up project on Britain and France, correct? Yeah. So anyway, I should say, I guess she's a professor at politics at Columbia University, and so we're really lucky to have you, and the floor is yours.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, and I want to thank everybody who has welcomed me so graciously here, and I very much enjoyed the meeting with the graduate students. So since there was a discussion about methodological work in politics, I want just to use this as an illustration, not just the sort of like the theme of the book, but also kind of how I compare to politics. Sort of the data that I collected. So this is, as you know, I've been working on social policy, and this is a really a different area for me. The main question is very simple: how did Europe move from corrupt elections and violent elections to the process of free elections? And what were the processes by which this happened, and what were the political coalitions that kind of led to these reforms? And it's very simple even to motivate this in the literature, because as you know, right, sort of our existing models of democratization focuses on large scale changes in the extension of the suffrage. I mean, that's sort of right, in a way mostly studied in cross-national research, whereas the more micro level changes in electoral rules that end with opportunities for vote buying and recommendation have been less explored or competitive. Historic. And I'm going to use standard sort of an analysis of the coalition that has sort of links, I guess, to my earlier work on coalitions. Right, I want to understand the political motivations of politicians, right, to support these changes in electoral rules. So on the one hand, it's going to be an effort to unpack, right, the economic and political motivations. But on the other hand, the book is ready. It also looks at the effects of these reforms, but I'm not going to discuss this in as much today, but it's also sort of part of the book. And it's, and just to sort of write, the analysis that I'm presenting today speaks very much about the German case you're going to see, because the politics is very, very complicated, and sort of right that the data that went into this project is very, very large, but it started and it still is a comparative project, right? And let me just give you my comparative sort of proposition that I want to put on the table before I move to the specifics of the German case, which is, well, we sort of try to understand this process of reform and ending corruption historically, right? Sort of the first observation that we're going to make is that sort of the mix of sort of electoral irregularities really different across the countries, right? So it's not just one, there's a a variety of things that are going on, right? Intimidation by state officials, intimidation by employers, right? Vote buying. And the mix differs across countries, and that has consequences for the coalitions for reform, because kind of the political coalitions, the incentives of politicians to reform, right, is kind of in a way shaped, right, by the underlying kind of types of irregularities that are in place. So the first thing that you really need to do is understand kind of, right, sort of what's happening in elections and what's the dominant irregularities. And so why kind of in this presentation today I'm going to talk about Germany, which is a country that has been kind of, that had very little road buying, but a lot of electoral intimidation. Okay, and we're going to see that sort of, right, the dynamics of reform of a system, right, ending electoral intimidation is very different than ending vote buying. And so the kind of the coalition for the reform of, to end intimidation took very, very different forms. And so just to tie this into kind of, the British case is kind of, the paradigmatic case of vote buying. And there we see very much kind of, political conflict between, sort of in the end, the costs of vote buying really kind of increased over time as kind of the suffrage expanded. And there it is a distributional conflict between rich and poor politicians, right? Okay, at some point in this, right, sort of reforms happened because kind of, it became too expensive and the kind of the poor politicians rebelled. And the kind of the data that I kind of use in British analysis is to show this, where I have this wealth data at the politician level, and I show that that is the strongest predictor for support reform. In Germany, however, which we're going to discuss today, is a very, very different case where it's kind of, about intimidation. So we want to understand, first of all, let's characterize. So it starts, my presentation is going to have two parts. I'm going to sort of characterize kind of, right, the incentives of, agents of the state and kind of private actors in engaging in intimidation. Okay, and then I'm going to sort of show you sort of, right, that kind of understanding that variation then kind of gives you an understanding of sort of, right, the costs of intimidation also vary across kind of, districts. And as the kind of the costs of intimidation increase, kind of, right, we see kind of this coalition, the formation of this coalition to end this. Okay. But there is a kind of comparative project, and I also work on France, and I can explain to you the French case also, which is very, very different, even better than Germany. Okay. So the demand, okay, as I said before, originated with politicians who could not take advantage of these opportunities. Okay. So that the most salient variables, that's I just mentioned this before, affected, depending on the mix among irregularities, so here we different politicians. And in Germany, the demand originated with politicians that faced high costs of intimidations. And I want to specify, so that the whole effort is to sort of really understand how these costs of intimidation vary. This is, and kind of to locate this, you can think of sort of, right, the cost of repression and marginal Robinson framework. It's kind of, that's just a macro variable, but here we're going to unpack this systematically. So clearly there is a literature on democratization, but it's kind of cross-national. It's just kind of, these, cross-national organization, and basically, it's very aggregated. We have discussed this in the meeting with the students. Then there's, significant limitations. There's very little we can learn from kind of, regressions of GDP and democracy. That's sort of my view. And that's why we need to move micro. Okay, but okay, sort of, right, and one is endogenous democratization, right, kind of, Przeworski et al. Right, rural inequalities kind of comes up as kind of, as a very significant variable, both in the kind of cross-national literature, Hutchinson and Robinson, Bosch, and also in this German case, and I'm going to show that actually rural inequality has no effects, okay, on the demand. So I'm going to develop an argument against rural inequality, showing that we need to unpack what rural inequality means and measure it systematically, and once kind of we move beyond the emphasis of inequality in land that the literature has, we're going to see that sort of, right, that has no actual relationship to the politics. And then sort of the another literature in which I have worked on kind of on human capital and skills, right, and sort of the varieties of capital, I must say that is completely misguided, and in fact that kind of, motivates sort of part of the chapters in the book, which are here, and I want to show that, and we're going to show, like, very specifically, we're going to measure skills with very, very, great amount of calculations. Okay. So that's where it's going, but before, okay, I have to start with the context, okay, because I have the hypotheses, okay, and I didn't know how to present this, but since there are some theorists who have invited me, so I'm going to present some more of the kind of, historical context, but I'm going to show you that the regression and the data analysis, the data I've put together to test this. But we have to move to 19th century Germany, okay, to understand sort of, right, the hypotheses, okay. So it's the electoral law that was introduced in 1869, 397 constituencies. It's a majoritarian system with runoff. That's important. Okay, so that you're not right, and kind of the winner can be elected in runoff if if a politician doesn't win a large enough number of votes in the first round. Okay, the law does not change, so there's no redistricting throughout the period. Okay, universal suffrage, but with significant, universal male suffrage, but with significant imperfections in voting technology, which kind of create these kind of opportunities for electoral intimidation. Because they make the kind of the monitoring of the vote and the observability, the vote being observable. So especially two imperfections kind of stand out and were at the object of these kind of long reform, okay, to reform the long process to reform the electoral system, which in fact only ended kind of on the eve of World War I with the introduction of the standardized urn. Okay, so the first is kind of right, the urns were imperfect. Right, so there were multiple kinds of containers that were used for ballot boxes, cigar boxes, drawers, suitcases, hand boxes, cooking pots, beer pots, and wash tubs. Okay, why is this important? It is important because ballots fell on top of each other in the exact order in which they were dropped, and that allowed, okay, those present at the voting place, okay, to compare like the list of the voters that they have with the kind of the list of the way the ballots were stacked, and allowed them to kind of determine who voted how. Okay, and then sort of right post-electorally kind of engage in punishments of those that voted in the wrong way. Okay, and even simple mundane electoral proposals such as shaking the urn, they were very, very contested politically and were defeated on numerous kind of occasions throughout that period. So it's clear that they understood how important, right, these kind of urns were. So hence, Lavinia Anderson, who's the Berkeley, the leading historian on the period, thinks that the voting was an open secret.
Can I just say,
yeah.
This is really interesting. Can't you just skip to the numbers?
Okay, no, because I didn't
Sorry.
get to the hypothesis. Okay, I didn't get to my hypothesis. So this is kind of, after, so right, they set in motion all this kind of surge of sort of, how the, urns should be designed, and kind of, this we see like in German engineering and war, these perfect, right, kind of, urns that sort of they designed in 1903, right? So kind of the centerpiece of the reform was reforming the urns. Okay, we see kind of right how, right, it should not sort of, right, prevent the stacking. Okay. The ballot design, also very, very important, very contested. Okay, so the uniform ballot was resisted. Okay, so all these reforms that I'm talking about are about sort of right reforming the ballot. Now the electoral law tried to be specific and say, well, the ballot had to be on white paper and it shouldn't be marked on exterior sign distinguishing it from others. However, this was not sort of enforced, and kind of there were all violations, and that tried to make the vote observable. Ballots have different shapes and sizes. Okay, straws, pyramids, bow. Okay, the differences in ballot size of the order of magnitude of 100, right? Okay, in the same kind of district. Ballots were distributed the same day, kind of, ballots of different shapes, so that you could know who exactly voted when and how, right? Okay, ballot on transparent papers. Okay, so that's, right, it was easy for the election official to hold it kind of against the light and kind of sort of understand, okay, how the voter voted. Okay, the third important sort of feature of the electoral law that explains all this kind of, the incentives, okay, is sort of that different irregularities were punished with different levels of stringency. And it took me almost a year to understand, because I started this project, and I think I mentioned this to you in the discussion. I was really puzzled there is no vote buying, right? From a contemporary literature of vote buying is the main irregularity. So why was there no vote buying in German elections? There were all this intimidation, all this pressure, no vote buying. Well, guess what? They tried to punish it, and so vote buying was punished with very, very high levels of stringency. It was punished by the penal code. The election was invalidated immediately. What did this create? Well, in place, it created incentives to substitute into the other strategies. The reason why we don't have vote buying, but we have so much intimidation in this context, is kind of this uneven punishment structure. So lower punishment for intimidation, everybody shifts into the kind of the strategy, and substitutes into the strategy of getting votes. Okay, and again, this is not sort of, I've coded, and kind of part of the chapters in the book is, we're coding kind of these, these reports on irregularities, and we're trying to see the mix of them. This is kind of a long quote from, again, a historian, and the bottom line is kind of, she has read all these reports, and there's only 3 cases of vote buying that she has found in all the kind of German elections. It's quite remarkable, okay? And it says, well, yes, Germany had a very different from England, yes, I said that before. Okay, there were, the voters were given a half bushel of dried peas. Okay, also sausages or okay, some schnapps. Okay, but okay, I know only 5 years. I know only 3 contests in the imperial period where corruption in the form of treating or bribery was even rumored to have affected the outcome of the election. Okay, in 2 of them the rumors are untrustworthy. Okay, whatever the incidence of these reciprocities, is clear that German voters were not, engaged in vote buying. Vote buying did not play a role in what Germans thought was wrong with their political promises. Okay, so what is wrong then? Well, there's other forms of sort of, right, there's other irregularities. And the main one is kind of, what I call sort of right electoral intimidation. And the main actors are, policemen and tax collectors that are widely used at times of elections, okay, by the kind of candidates. Okay, either to prevent opposition candidates from campaigning, preventing voters from reaching polls, or locking up opposition candidates. And just to give you an idea, sort of, right, the kind of the stuff that's sort of, right, that sort of I'm analyzing in the book. So this is just an example, an incident, from a district, a random district in Germany in the 1891 election, Potsdam district. And this is what I mean by intimidation. Okay? The mayor ripped the ballots and copies of, this is a Social Democratic newspaper, from the hands of the Social Democratic ballot conveyor. The letter protested and showed the mayor a copy of the electoral law, but the letter ripped also this document to pieces. He threw Kaiser, the ballot conveyor, to the ground, and then threw him onto the streets on the staircase. At the end, he shouted, "Let the dogs loose." Somebody released the dogs, which okay. So this is normal. Okay, so this is the use of the state, okay, at times of election. Actually, there's no okay, because kind of the mayors, okay, take this really active role. Okay, so this is what I mean by intimidation. It's pretty clear. Okay, and this is kind of significantly documented.
Were they German shepherds?
Okay, however, right, this intimidation now existed, but it varied. Right? It varied across districts and over time, so it was costly. Okay, for some politicians kind of using the policeman or the tax collector was really costly. So what we need to understand is why did it vary, right? If it was possible and kind of it was not punished as it was worldwide, but if it was not universal, right? So what explains the variation and what are the constraints on the use of the policeman? So one hypothesis that I have and I test in the book is that kind of, well, this is a system with runoffs, right? So there is a kind of system where candidates need to form a coalition in the second round if they kind of, one of them fails to reach a significant majority in the first round. And that really constrains the use of the intimidation because you kind of know that you are going to have, right? So the conservative, okay, candidate in a district that needs to form a coalition, okay, with the, say, we anticipate a coalition with the liberal in the second round will kind of not use the policeman at times of election. So right-wing political fragmentation is the most significant constraint that we observe on the use of electoral intimidation. And especially as the right-wing coordination among parties declined over time, we see a lower reliance, okay, on the, I'm going to show you the statistical results, but that's kind of the idea, right? We see a reliance, so we see this shift towards the noiseless deployment of the policemen, right? They are really concerned, okay, about their need to form coalitions. So, okay, so they are sort of even, so right, so I'm testing this, I'm using this kind of, the calculations that the, bureaucratic officials make in the ministry about sort of, well, how many policemen should be deployed. Well, over time, beginning with 1893, okay, they are really concerned that it is too costly, and so they, they want to keep it quiet to disrupt possible electoral alliances. And in one of the chapters, I'm also examining variation across, German blenders in the use of the, of the intimidation. And the surprising result is that, Saxony, which is kind of, the most developed, economic kind of region, has the most intensive, use, of public intimidation. And also, more intensive than Prussia, whereas the kind of these two southern regions, with very high fragmentation, kind of use the policeman less often. I'll come to this in the text, but that's just the kind of, just the motivation. But the second and more interesting, and that's kind of, a unique German kind of, idiosyncrasy in a way, is that sort of like a second important actor that engaged in electoral intimidation for employers. And again, I'm going to let me understand because it's so, backbreaking. And again, she puts Germany in comparative perspective. In no other country, at least among the civilized lands to which Germans like to compare themselves, was the practice of election intimidation by bread lords felt so universal, so unvarnished, and so endured. It's remarkable. Here's my test. Okay, so what is it that the employers were doing? Okay, to intimidate, or what is that kind of employers were doing at times of elections to intimidate vote? On the one hand, so they had all these kind of measures of turnout, buying, turnout kind of changing, or they changed the working hours. Okay, they locked up workers in the mine. Okay, during the duration of the vote, which reminds us of Romania today, when miners are still locked up in their mines. Okay, not to vote. Okay, employers doubled the shift. Okay, to prevent workers from voting. Okay, but then kind of since they had control over the workforce, they really were the agents that were distributing the ballots. Hence, they were marching voters to the polls. Okay, making them to hold the ballots over their head. Okay, in a very systematic way that they knew. Okay, they did not have the wrong ballots. Okay, or they kind of voters were asked to vote alphabetically. Okay, at the polls, it's very important because this is where kind of they could take advantage right, of the kind of, these imperfections in voting technology to really figure out, okay, how everybody voted, okay, to keep a close tab on the voter's choice. Okay, and so, right, I mean, kind of these are the instances that, again, we have reported, maybe kind of I'm getting too much detail here. Okay, so what kind of ballots are you holding there? Okay, this is just a few feet away where the Krupp election workers, okay, handed a Krupp ballot to every voter. From that point on, the voter could be observed. Okay, so it was very difficult to slip a centrist ballot, right, a Catholic ballot in the urn without being noticed. Okay. And the strongest kind of punishment that employers had, and this is kind of widely reported. I mean, this is kind of the dominant irregularity. This is kind of electoral layoff, right? The dismissal, right? You observed the voters, you observed how they voted, and then kind of you punished those that voted incorrectly, meaning Catholic or Social Democrat. Okay, with layoff. Okay, and this is again widely used. Okay. I'm just giving one example here, okay, and this is kind of, it's very common, again, kind of, sort of, these are kind of the instances that are reported electoral. So this is one district, Pfalz, Ludwigshafen, so, okay, the local employer, which was sort of, Badische und Fabrik, which is today's BASF, okay, again, informed voters, okay, not to vote Social Democratic. Okay, anyone who does not vote for the employer will be out of work tomorrow. After the election, the firm made good on its promises, okay. So again, this is used, this is very documented. I mean, this is the stuff that is being reported about irregularities. However, again, this varies systematically over regions and across times. So we want to understand, right? We want to really understand what are the constraints on this. I mean, because it is not universal, right? And the hypothesis that I have and that I'm going to bring to the data is that kind of, it varies. I mean, the critical variable that affects the costs of employers to do this is the kind of this economic concentration. So imagine, okay, and this is kind of a very simple idea. So imagine a district where there's one firm controlling employment and output. Clearly that employer has no kind of costs, right, with respect to kind of, electoral intimidation. As employment and output fragments, right, we move from a district that is concentrated to a district that has high levels of fragmentation, right? Okay, on the one hand, voters have more outside options, right? And hence, laying off a worker, okay, for their political choice maybe in fact have an economic cost on the firm, so the firm is less likely to use that. Okay, workers have more options, employers have fewer control over kind of the number of workers they can use and sort of bring to that cause. And as a result, okay, the use of economic intimidation, okay, should decline as the economic fragmentation increases, right? And this is the kind of one economic kind of argument that I'm going to test in the data by constructing these disaggregated measures of economic concentration. But just not, I mean, is this clear, the logic here? Right, so one company down, one firm dominated down, this is kind of should be at the maximum. And sort of as fragmentation increases, okay, the costs of intimidation increase. Okay. So, okay, but also just to the final example, which is kind of an example I love because it speaks against varieties of capitalism, is, okay, so also, right, I mean, in addition to laying off workers, okay, employers coordinated and did not hire, okay, workers that had been laid off and had voted, incorrectly again, meaning Catholic or Social Democratic. Okay, and here this is an example, okay, in the Tsar region, which is this practice of employer intimidation is really pervasive, okay, it was also known as the Arabian Sarabia. Okay, and again, this is kind of what an employer was putting on the door of his enterprise at the time of election. Okay, and sort of, it's a question of honor to vote for Bassaman. Okay, these workers who found themselves without bread and country and with no prospect to find a job in the mining industry of Kazar. Here, the enterprises have an agreement not to accept a mutual exchange of workers. So kind of, the enterprise is also coordinated, right, and not kind of, hiring, okay, because kind of on the dismissal slip, it was clear that it was kind of, politically dangerous vote, and the enterprise is coordinated not to rehire the worker, and this is kind of clearly documented again and again and again. Okay, so I'm going to show you two analyses. First, I'm going to show you a test of these propositions, and this is kind of, I think, where I wanted to get is that kind of how I'm going to test this empirically. But right, kind of on the one hand, I'm going to show you a test that sort of, right, I mean, all these kind of, variables actually help predict electoral irregularities. Okay, so I'm going to show you in a minute how I'm testing this. And then I'm going to move to the kind of the demand for reform, and I'm going to show that kind of, right, it is the politicians, the districts that have high costs of repression that are the ones who are pushing for reforms. So some political variables that sort of we're going to test is, the margin, okay, the strength of opposition candidates, okay, so I'm going to test for a non-linear relationship between the strength of Social Democrats and the district. The argument that I made before about the fragmentation of right-wing parties as kind of constraining the use of intimidation, so the more fragmented the kind of, the right is, the lesser use of intimidation. And kind of right, and sort of I'm going to show you like a test of this kind of argument about occupational heterogeneity, right? So kind of as the occupational heterogeneity increases, the cost of accumulation increases, so kind of we should see less of use. And then sort of right, I mean the kind of the rival explanations, in land holding and human capital. Okay.
Yeah. Would inequality be correlated with economic heterogeneity?
I'm going to show you in a minute what the problem with inequality. Can I get to this?
Yeah.
So inequality in what? I mean, that is the question. Because kind of inequality, the way it is used in the literature is just inequality in the size of farms. And I'm going to show you that that is just a poor predictor of labor market conditions. So you have a lot of inequality, right? A lot of large farms, but no workers working on those farms. Hence inequality in farms doesn't give us any sort of leverage on what is kind of, whether so local landlords have any kind of control over employers. Okay, I'll come to this, I'll show you when I construct. Okay, so the outcome, and sort of, some of you may have seen, I mean, in this kind of chapter, this is the same kind of level as Dan Ziblatt has in his, but with a kind of very different explanation in his paper on, electoral fraud. Okay, so here the total number of disputed elections, I mean, the key that I want to highlight is the kind of, it's not just, and if it is just about inequality, it just would be East Prussia. But this region is really, really high, which is the highly industrialized, right, the rural area, right, the highly kind of sort of highly industrialized. And this is kind of Saxony, what I said before, right, kind of Saxony has, in fact, higher levels of irregularities than kind of, I'll come back to this, this is maybe not relevant. So let me show what I did, and this is kind of, we had this discussion with the students, so this is kind of how I see, our ability actually to do new kind of research in comparative politics. So I'm using here the German occupational census. Okay, and this is the crown jewel of European historical statistics. This is kind of really, really kind of the most incredible, historical source. What the German census did is basically they collected every village, okay, information on every kind of industry, 200 occupations, and every firm. Okay, so we're going to have very, very, very precise, okay, economic information, okay, at the village level. Okay, this is kind of 1 million lines of code that is kind of data, right, of raw input that really allows us to understand, right, economic kind of conditions in the district and how they affect kind of political competition. So in this case, fraud, but I'm using it in different areas. Okay, and I'm constructing this, standard, Herfingle index of concentration, and this is how it looks. And again, you see kind of, right, the ruler is high. I mean, this is kind of what, sort of, right, is consistent with what I told you before. This is where it's concentrated, this is where the intimidation happens. Okay, and you see here, it's correlated here with inequality, but not everywhere. The second input, and this is, because again, this is something that's an important hypothesis in comparative politics about skills and, sort of, right, political, reforms. The occupational census not only has information on the occupations, but it also has information on the skill profile, okay, of every right kind of occupation and every kind of in every district, right? So we know exactly the number of skilled butchers in every German village, okay, over time. Okay, this is like, okay, so again, I think kind of this, unambiguously is going to, okay, sort of end, okay, some of these debates on sort of, right, the importance of skill at the, okay, so we're constructing skill measures, okay, because, so then there is a kind of a table, and kind of I see every industry, the weaver, and the knitters, and the dyers, and the fringe makers, and so on. We know for each one of these industries, okay, in each village, how many, workers are skilled. Okay, so kind of, I think we can end this debate about do skills matters or not. I think kind of this data is going to allow us, okay, finally, right, to sort of test this. Okay, and this sort of the relative importance of skills, okay, for political outcomes, because we know them exactly very precisely, and we know them also how they change over time. So that's the second. So I mean, the question is, I mean, does the presence of a more skilled workforce increase kind of the cost of intimidation? Okay, and does it reduce okay, fraud? Does it kind of increase the demand? Okay, for reform. I mean, all these questions we can actually test. Okay, so this was like a year of work to, okay, but this is kind of in the discussion that we had this morning. I mean, this is the kind of data that I mean when I mean, sort of being serious about, sort of doing this, because kind of we have this data and this sort of has not been used before, and it is kind of technologically possible now to actually digitize it and use it. So that's the input. So this is how I'm going to test the, okay. Now, my point on rural inequality, this is a prominent hypothesis in, in comparative politics, but again, kind of the advantage of doing it micro, so the advantage of not using some kind of, whoever's measure of, landholding inequality in the present day was very problematic. Okay, I think we need to think of inequality of why and distinguish inequality in farms versus inequality in employment. And Germany was unequal on the first, but not unequal on the second. And maybe this makes it clear, right? So this is how it comes in the census, right? So this is the first, district, it's Netherlands in today's Lithuania, right? Okay, so here we know the number of farms and their area, and here we compute the Gini of rural inequality. But when you look at the employment, you see that there's very, very few, workers in the large farms, and farms over 200 hectares. There's barely, and this is kind of very known, right? So the inequality on employment looks much less unequal, and in fact it's not equal. So one is not correlated with the other, which is what I'm trying to show here. Okay, right, this is share of workers in large farms and then holding inequality. Yes, it is unequal, but with very low share of workers in large farms. Okay, so this explains why. Okay, it is misleading, in fact, to use land holding inequality as a variable that should predict the control of landlords over workers, because it's not correlated. Okay, it's just empty land. Okay. Okay, and I think we have to be careful about this, and when we have to stop making these claims about rural inequality, it doesn't explain anything. Okay, and I have lots of chapters on just rural inequality and what is said, but I'm going to answer this with confidence. And by the way, this is an agreement with